Welcome to a French Collection podcast, a go-to podcast for everything on France, hosted by me, Annette Charlton. With guests, candid insights into living in France, travel discussions and more, our show will transport you to the land of cheese and croissants. So now let's dive into our next episode. Hi everybody, Annette here again. Our last podcast was about why I thought Rodin Museum was the most beautiful in Paris. And throughout the podcast, I went through different parts of the museum and we got to the thinker, the sculpture The Thinker. And I mentioned that I thought The Thinker needed a podcast of its own. The Thinker is a famous sculpture by French sculptor François Auguste Rodin. That is part of the collection of Rodin sculptures at the Musée Rodin in Paris. The museum is located in the classic 18th century mansion called Hotel Byron, which is nestled just behind Les Invalides in the 7th arrondissement. The elegant two-storey Hotel Particulier overlooks 7 acres of manicured lawns, rose gardens and sculptures, with the sculptures dotted amongst the rows of perfectly pruned trees. The sculptor, Auguste Rodin as he is commonly referred to, is considered the founder of modern sculpture. He was schooled traditionally and has been described as taking a craftsman-like approach to his work and creating complex models with his signature deeply pocketed surface models. The monumental thinker. So the original thinker was created in 1880 for the gates of hell, which I went to in more depth in the previous podcast. With its blend of calm and strength, the thinker became world-renowned as a symbol of hope and faith in humanity. The original model was only about 70 centimetres, but the monumental thinker, that's in the museum gardens, measures nearly 2 metres. The monumental model was installed in front of the Pantheon in 1906 and transferred to the museum in 1922. The Thinker is the sculptor's most famous work. Just about everybody knows this figure of a naked man sitting on a rock with his feet tense and his body twisted and off balance. He sits meditating, his head resting on the back of his hand. The inspiration for the figure was taken from the gates of hell. Very early on, Rodin had the idea of including above his gate a figure representing Dante, the author of the Divine Comedy. The thinker was initially entitled The Poet. He leans forward and observes the damned wandering hell for eternity. The image of the thinker, pondering his creation, became synonymous with Rodin himself. In 1903, the thinker shot to fame and has held its fame ever since. The enlargement of the thinker to the monumental thinker. The enlargement of the thinker from 70 centimetres to 2 metres gave the work an even more universal character, and because of its nudity and unattachment to any specific period in time, the thinker is universal. The thinker's powerful and muscular body unsettled many of Rodin's contemporaries who found the artistic choice inappropriate. However, he responded, "My idea was to represent the man as a symbol of humanity, a robust workman-like figure. He stops mid-task to think about things, to exercise his faculty, which distinguishes him from the animals." The exact location of the thinker in the garden of the museum is no coincidence. It was carefully thought out. The placement was carefully carried out by the executor of Rodin's will, who, following his wishes, created a stunning 360-degree visual journey. The garden was designed as a triangle with 2 trees creating a triumphal perspective from the gates of hell. Left past the thinker, as far as the Eiffel Tower, continuing left you see the Dome of the Invalides, and finally left to the Hotel Byron itself. You'll take in an entire architectural history of Paris in one sweeping gaze. Turning to the right from the monumental thinker, you can see the gates of hell, which are also illuminated in the evening and highlight the small format thinker, that's the original thinker, on the Triumphanium dead centre. In the Woody Allen fantasy comedy film Midnight in Paris, starring Owen Wilson, an early scene is a visit to the museum where the four main characters are admiring the thinker. Paul flexes his faux knowledge of Rodin until he is corrected by the guide, and Gil Pender, played by Wilson. So that's our in-depth guide of looking at the thinker. And our next podcast will look at the new 2021 trends in purchasing property in France. So if you're thinking of purchasing property in France and wondering if the pandemic has affected the property market, we'll have Joanna Leggett, Marketing Director at Leggett Immobilier, give us her ideas and her thoughts on the new 2021 trends in purchasing property in France. And so that brings us to the end of another podcast and our time together. Thanks for listening. I've really enjoyed your company, and I look forward to sharing more on France and all things French with you next week. Until then, you can head over to the blog at www.afrenchcollection.com for the full blog post. And so it's merci from me, and à bientôt.